So we're well into autumn here in southwest Finland. The migrating birds have all flown south and the birch trees are all turning brown. But as you can imagine, I'm not here to talk about that. What I am here to talk about is the coming budget in the UK that's going to be held on Wednesday the 20th of October and what it might mean for you and your family. And whether there's going to be a British financial crisis incoming, maybe that might affect the value of the pound. Because there's some arguments, fairly convincing arguments, that might suggest that in just 100 days, the Labour Party has completely lost control over the UK's public sector finances. I mean, like the government's finances. Because that's basically what people mean when they talk about fiscal policy or fiscal implications. What they're talking about is the government's tax and spending plans for the year ahead. And when the government spends more than it collects in taxes, the government runs what's called a fiscal deficit. And that's been very, very large now for, well, I don't know, best part of 25 years. And every year that the government runs a fiscal deficit, that adds to the total stock of public sector debt. They call that the national debt. That's the total amount that the UK government owes to the people that have lent the UK government money. So first thing to kind of take into account here is that since Starmer's taken over, they've increased government spending quite sharply. For example, there's been some very big pay rises for NHS staff. You know, obviously, we all know what those people have done. That's just an ongoing bribe of those people so that they do the government's bidding. I bet in Nazi Germany, actually, Hitler probably paid the Einsatzgruppe group, and well, I bet there was extra payments for people that worked in concentration camps. Other public sector employees have got big pay rises, police, and then you've got like quasi-public sector in name, you know, private sector in name only, but really part of the public sector, like the railway workers. So, you know, what Starmer's been doing there is just pay big pay rises, keep his core vote on side. It's quite cynical, really. At the same time, there's been record immigration into Britain, so that's obviously going to lead to big increases in state education spending, National Health Service, and then just miscellaneous benefits like child benefit. You know, people coming into the country with kids. There's going to be expenditure on the, you know, putting people up in hotels and other accommodation. So when Starmer talks about there being no money left, well, you know, he's kind of right in the sense that he's blown it all on public sector pay rises and by bringing in people. So these three ways of financing that extra spending. The first way is by raising more taxes, and Starmer before the election said that he made a pledge that he's not going to increase national insurance, he's not going to increase income tax, and he's not going to increase VAT. So the thing to bear in mind here is that those three taxes raise the lion's share of government tax income. That's the main vehicles in which they steal money from me and you, through those three taxes. So if you're going to rule out raising those three taxes, it's going to make it quite hard for you to raise money in other ways. You know, you're looking at other taxes that in the whole scheme of things raise a fraction of the revenue that those big three taxes raise. Right, now here's something like really super important, is that I don't know, when I was a teacher I used to notice this particularly with maths, physics, chemistry teachers in particular, like straight line thinkers. So what these people fail to take into account is that when you do something, when you try to implement a strategy, the success of the strategy won't just depend on what you do, it'll also depend on how other people react to your strategy. And that's always going to be it's going to be an unknown. You can see what maybe people have done in the past as a reaction to previous things that you've done, but they might choose to react in a different way. So what I'll talk about now is what I think he's likely to do, and then secondly, after that, how people are likely to react to it, and then what will that mean for his plans. So his first plan is to impose VAT on private schools. So 20% of what's spent on private schools will go into the government's pockets. Now, historically, about 7% of kids go to private schools. So you might think, well, it's quite a lot of kids, you know, should raise quite a bit of money. But what you have to take into account is how people are likely to respond to that. And this is where Starmer and Rachel Reeves, she's supposed to be a chess player, but you know, she obviously wasn't a very good one, because she's not thinking through the knock-on effects, the implications. So I'll talk about what's likely to happen. So there'll be many parents who currently send their kids to a private school, and they'll think, well, the schools, they already operate on quite narrow profit margins, so they're going to have to increase fees and pass on this VAT in a normal way. So I won't be able to afford the fees. There's a lot of parents who are in that position, who send their kids to a private school, and it's blinking expensive as it is. Adding 20% VAT on top of that will be the straw that breaks the camel's back for many. So what's likely to happen is that there'll be a big transfer of parents moving their kids from private schools into state schools. So what will that mean? Well, it will basically mean that the government has to provide more places in state schools, and on average it costs the state £8,000 per year to educate a kid in the state sector. So, and then the other factor as well is that many private schools won't be able to survive, and they won't be able to pass on the 20% VAT to their client group. You know, we're talking about the Division 3 and Division 4 private schools, the type of like low-level private schools that people on this web forum that I used to post on, those types of ones that you've never heard of, but they've got like maybe a nicer uniform than the state school, but though many of those schools will go bust. Okay, so that will cause an even bigger transfer of kids being educated in the private sector, moving over to the state sector. Okay, so how much extra VAT will they collect by imposing VAT on private schools? Might not collect much at all. Might actually end up collecting less VAT, because there'll be fewer private schools and there'll be fewer kids attending those fewer private schools. And at the same time, government spending, there's a branch down here, government spending on education, state education, is likely to go up. So the decision to impose 20% VAT on private schools might end up increasing government spending and decreasing government tax income. So it might end up adding to the government's fiscal deficit rather than decreasing it. So, spectacular own goal, I would say. To those that say, oh, it might be deliberate, they might want the state to have a tighter grip on education. They might actually welcome the demise of private schools because private schools offer some independence. That argument doesn't hold any water at all. And the reason for that is private schools are heavily regulated by the state anyway. So the type of Marxist woke agenda that's being pushed in state schools is already happening in private schools anyway. And I think many private school parents would be quite shocked at the level of woke indoctrination that they're paying for. The second thing that Labour have decided that they're going to do to raise more taxes, figure out some ways of taxing the incomes and assets of the rich more heavily. Which always begs the question, who are the rich? This is the funny thing, with socialists, they're never the rich. What they do is always urge for the government to create a more equal society by taxing other people more heavily, so the money can be redistributed to people that they approve of. But anyway, what we have to consider is how these rich people are likely to react to higher taxes on their wealth and their incomes. Like, what would you do? I think the obvious thing that you would do if you're sensible is just get out of Britain, emigrate, go and take your wealth and your ability to earn a good income and go and live in some other country and pay taxes there. I think the other thing as well that's linked to that is kind of Starmer's authoritarianism will have freaked out a lot of people. So that desire to go and take your toys and go and play elsewhere will be very, very strong with many people. I could see all of this coming in 2020, with all the crazy stuff that happened without even a proper parliamentary vote. The writing was on the wall even back then. So there'll be loads more people now who are waking up, and this extra tax grab, taxing people who are successful, wealth creators, people who create jobs for other people. They're just going to emigrate, aren't they? So these extra taxes on the rich, the net effect, paradoxically, will be the government will end up collecting less tax in total rather than more, because although they might put tax rates up, if they have fewer pounds of income and wealth to tax because the rich are moving their money offshore, they become tax resident in another country, that's going to mean that the net effect is a fall in taxes collected by the British government. What we got here is basic maths. If you think about it, the total amount of tax a government's able to collect is a function of two variables: the tax rate, and then the second one is the amount of income, tax pounds, taxable income that's actually declared to the government. So if people emigrate, there'll be fewer pounds of income and asset values declared to the UK government for taxable purposes. So although you might put the tax rate up, could be a far bigger drop in the amount of taxes, pounds available to collect. The third thing that Comrade Starmer's promised to do is to tax private pensions more aggressively. Now, this will raise more in tax income, provided that there's still that people don't react to this change by withdrawing from private pension schemes. But that's pretty silly, isn't it? Because that's exactly what people are likely to do. They're likely to respond to their pensions being taxed more aggressively by maybe not starting a pension in the first place, or by trying to invest in assets that are completely outside of the system, that don't have a counterparty risk. So I'm already seeing signs of people kind of wising up. So, for example, when I was in Greece, and I was chatting with this very clued up 20-year-old who kind of refused a medical experiment. He was also talking to me about Bitcoin. He knew loads and loads and loads about it. And he also knew about other more traditional stores of value. That seem to be getting more and more popular again, that lie outside the financial system, that are very, very difficult for looters, politicians, to steal. So I don't think this if he tries to tax pensions more aggressively, I don't think that's going to raise much money. So I think the bottom line is, and the other one, of course, too, is with all of these forms of taxation, kind of eventually it breaks a social contract, especially if you're using people's taxes to fund stupid wars in Ukraine, or to bring in people on rubber boats and house them in 4-star hotels, or use your taxes to fund kind of woke studies, all the kind of the kind of nonsense that goes on in schools. Well, then people sort of quite rightly think, well, I need to starve the beast here. I need to maybe give up work early. I need to maybe not do as much overtime. I need to take my pay rises in the form of choosing to have more hours at leisure, because they can't tax that. So all of these things are likely to happen. The incentive for people to work fewer hours or retire early, like I did, it's just going to get stronger and stronger and stronger as Starmer tries to increase the intensity of his looting. So, like, what else could Starmer do to finance his extra spending on the rubber boat people and the kind of Ukrainian war machine? One thing is that he could try to cut other areas of government spending, so like public services that ordinary people use. So yeah, he's already started to do that. The winter fuel allowance payments, whatever, is an example of that. But again, the problem is that people will notice that, they'll get angry about it, and people will respond by withdrawing from the system, by working fewer hours, by doing everything within their power to reduce the amount of taxable income that they have. They can't tax leisure time. The final option is the most likely one, though, which is they increase spending in total, and they're not able to raise anything extra in taxes. So what happens is that the government ends up with a bigger fiscal deficit. So the total shortfall in taxation over what's needed to finance government spending each year, it gets bigger. So governments borrow by issuing these things called bonds, which is a fixed interest loan that's bought by predominantly overseas investors, banks and stuff. That's how it used to be. But these days, because there's a lack of saving generally in the economy, what's happened is that central banks now print money. They then distribute that money to commercial banks, and then the central bank passes banking regulations which forces the commercial banks to use the printed money that they've just received to buy government bonds. So it's kind of, in effect, if you those funny like shell games, if you kind of cut to the chase, what it really amounts to is that the central banks have been printing money to finance government spending. And if you increase the total amount of money printed in the economy, you're going to increase total expenditure. In this case, if you're printing money to finance benefits for migrants, these people are going to be straight out buying jeans, smartphones, all the rest of it. That's going to increase expenditure in the economy. It's not going to increase production. So you're going to have more spending, same amount of goods, rising prices. You're going to have even bigger increases in the cost of living. You'll have inflation, much higher inflation than even what you've had so far. inflation, it reduces the internal purchasing power of money. So, you know, when I was a kid growing up, I could buy a packet of crisps for 2p. So back in the early 70s, with £1, I could buy 50 bags of crisps. Today, because of inflation, £1 would only buy me like maybe 1 1/3 bags of crisps, or maybe just one bag of crisps. I've not been back to England for a while, but it's probably likely now that a bag of crisps, probably the price of it is probably quite close to £1. So inflation, what it does then is it compromises sterling's ability to act as a store of value, and higher rates of inflation are going to reduce the demand for UK assets, because the returns that those UK assets generate in pounds is worth less, because the purchasing power of sterling has declined due to the inflation. So what, again, you know, this is just going to accelerate a trend that we've already been seeing, is that high UK inflation will reduce the real rate of return on UK assets. Foreign investors will react to that by selling those UK assets and moving their money out of the country. So what you're likely to see is, in some asset classes, you could get slower asset price increases, or maybe even in some cases decreases. And also you'll get foreign investors, moving their money out of Britain. So to do that, you need to swap pounds for the country's currency that you want to now move your money into, and that'll lead to a fall in the value of sterling. People selling sterling to buy other currencies, it will depress the value of sterling. So you're likely to get a weaker pound. And what a weaker pound does is it increases the price of imports. So you can get into a pretty nasty feedback loop there of rising import prices cause inflation. Inflation causes a fall in the real return offered on UK assets. So maybe overseas investors who didn't sell the first time maybe consider selling now. That leads to even more money leaving the country, leaving sterling. So the value of sterling, the price of sterling on foreign exchange markets drops, and you know, more inflation, rinse, lather and repeat. So this is what's happened. You know, it's not before. If you look at countries like, say, Turkey at the moment, Lebanon a couple of years ago, obviously Argentina in the past, Brazil, they've all suffered from terrible public finances, which then has led to capital flight, money leaving their country, very sharp declines in the value of their currencies, more inflation, and you get just like a full-blown financial crisis. So I think that could easily happen in the UK, could easily happen. The only question is, and it's kind of an academic question anyway, is whether Starmer knows about this. Does Rachel Reeves know about this? Or is it like, you know, are they kind of idiots flying a plane, stupid people doing stupid things? Never rule that out with socialists, by the way. Or are they actually acting under orders to deliberately destroy the UK economy? Are they at that level in the big club where they actually know that that's what they're being used for, you know? And then, of course, the mainstream media, what they'll say is that Rachel Reeves and Starmer are idiots, and what they did to the British economy, it was just ineptitude. Or is it going to be deliberate? If I was to hazard a guess, I think it's the latter. I think that these people probably do know what they're doing, and that then, you know, so you'll have normies going, oh, like, why would they do that? Very simply, First reason is a transfer of wealth. So money leaves Britain, people sell their assets, asset prices fall. So that creates opportunities, doesn't it, for members of the big club to pick up assets at a fraction of their normal price. So, you could see this maybe happening in the property market. If they go around trying to tax buy-to-let very aggressively, that would cause a lot of buy-to-let property landlords to sell up, house prices fall, and then BlackRock and all the others can become the biggest landlord in Britain, buying portfolios up for penny on the pounds. Some might say that this is already happening, isn't it? The second reason why Starmer and Reeves have been told to crash the economy is order out of chaos, isn't it? You need a massive financial crisis to get people to go along with things that they otherwise wouldn't have gone along with had there been no crisis. So what I'm talking here is kind of technocracy, and in particular universal basic income, maybe a switch over to a fully digital programmable sterling, pound sterling, and basically that being linked to the Chinese social credit score thing. Quite interesting, because today I was looking on Twitter, and it seems to be, people can correct me on this, but seems to be a massive push for supermarkets like Tesco to be going along with like banning cash. Like, another thing that I saw that kind of pricked my interest this morning was Starmer saying that his number one priority is to promote economic growth in Britain. So how everything that they say is inverted. So the opposite of promoting economic growth is to collapse the UK economy. So maybe that's Starmer in his own way telling us that that's what they plan to do. To collapse the British economy, so that he can then bring order out of chaos. And then they've got a convenient excuse, haven't they? That never mind. It was just an honest mistake. We weren't deliberately trying to crash the economy to bring in CBDCs, but it just happened, and we were just incompetent. And what sort of person would let themselves be the fall guy for that? Because Starmer's position in British history is not going to be too good, is it? He's not going to be remembered fondly. But I don't know about you, but the more I think about Starmer and just observe him, he seems to be not quite right, does he? Really, he's got a look of the MK Ultra about him. Same as many of these other people. I don't know. I saw those images of Jeremy Vine on. I wish I hadn't seen those, but properly weird guy. Same as Angela Rayner. Not good. So we shouldn't be surprised that these people will basically do everything that's asked of them, including wrecking their own country. Yeah. Of course, it's likely that these people, the big club, have got all sorts of dirty stuff on these people. They're very, very controllable. So, what can you do about all of this? Well, I guess it's acting on advice that's been given repeatedly, really, which is to basically deprive them of income that they can tax, and then you do that legally, of course, by just choosing leisure time, learning to get pleasure from life from things that don't need money to buy. And then the second thing is to move your wealth into assets that lie outside their system, that don't have an unreliable counterparty that involves a financial institution. Yeah, and that's all that I want to say today. Just a little bit of quirky fun here. This is an example of Finns loving old cars. This is like some beat up summer car. It's got all like punk stickers on it, the cramps. So yeah, that's all I want to say today. So God bless.